Margaret Elaine Kovar was 58 years old and standing in a Kroger parking lot in Dayton, Ohio, counting $31.47 in coins and folded singles before she went inside. The air smelled of diesel exhaust and rain-wet asphalt, the particular combination that belongs to late November in the Midwest. Not unpleasant, just honest. Her hands were cold. She had not brought gloves. The pair she owned last winter was still in the pocket of a coat she had given to Goodwill in September, because the coat had been Darren's favorite and she could not keep walking past it in the hallway. She was not performing anything. She was simply inside the life she had. Darren Kovar had died 14 months ago. A stroke at 53 on a Tuesday morning with his coffee still brewing. He had left behind $6, $200 in a joint checking account, a leased truck the dealership repossessed within 30 days, and a family who received the news of his death with the careful, managed expressions of people deciding how much of their schedule to rearrange. His older brother Conrad had flown in from Phoenix, stayed 2 nights, and left before the repast. He had spent this past Thanksgiving at a resort in Scottsdale. Margaret had spent it eating soup at a counter she had cleared herself. For 7 years before Darren died, she had driven his mother Vivian to chemotherapy in Akron, 41 miles each way, twice a month, then every week, then more. She had refilled Vivian's prescriptions at 11 o'clock at night when the pharmacy near the hospital was the only one still open. She had slept on Vivian's couch during the bad weeks, the weeks when Vivian could not be left alone, and Conrad was unavailable and the youngest daughter lived in Portland, and everyone agreed that Margaret was so capable, so steady, so good at this. No one had ever said thank you in a way that cost them anything. Inside the zippered lining of her coat, pressed flat against her ribs, was a small brass key on a plain ring. Vivian had pressed it into her hand 3 weeks before she died, with the particular grip of a woman making a decision rather than a gesture, and said only, "Don't let Conrad find this first." Margaret had no idea what it opened. She had kept it anyway. Her phone rang. A Columbus area code she did not recognize. The woman on the other end identified herself as calling from the office of an estate attorney and said that Vivian Kovar's will had been formally entered into probate and that Margaret had been named and that her presence was requested at the reading in 4 days' time. She stood in the cold with the coins still in her hand. What could a woman who had nothing possibly leave her? The 14th floor smelled of leather and recycled air and, underneath both, something cedar and sharp that had arrived before its owner. Conrad's cologne, already occupying the room when Margaret walked in. He came through the door 7 minutes after she did, which she understood was not an accident. The charcoal cashmere overcoat, the Rolex on his left wrist, dark face, oyster bracelet, the kind of watch that does not tell you it is expensive because it does not need to. Shoes so cleanly resoled they caught the overhead light. His wife Diane moved beside him in a cream blazer, sat down, and did not look at Margaret in the particular way of someone who has decided another person is not worth the energy of acknowledgement. The attorney's name was Howell. He was careful and procedural, and read the will the way a man reads a document he did not write and takes no position on. Steadily, without emphasis, in the order things were recorded. Conrad received the family home in Bexley. Appraised at $847,000, Howell noted, as of the previous spring. He received the investment accounts, $312,100, split across 2 institutions, the vehicle. The remaining furniture. 4 pieces of art individually catalogued. Diane received each item with a small, satisfied inclination of her head, the nod of a woman confirming what she already knew was coming. Then Howell read Margaret's name, "To my daughter-in-law, Margaret Elaine Kovar. I leave the property at 4 Sycamore Mill Road, Canfield, Ohio, and its full contents." Conrad's exhale came through his nose, controlled, brief, shaped almost into amusement. He turned toward Diane with the ease of a man in a room he owns and said it just loud enough to cross the table. "She gets the rot house. Mother always did have a soft spot for lost causes. Diane did not respond. She was already looking at her phone. Margaret looked at Howell. She asked one question: is there a key? Howell opened a small manila envelope and slid a brass key across the table. She picked it up. It was cold and faintly rough at the bow, the teeth worn asymmetrically on one side from decades of use. Stamped into the head, small enough to miss. A crane, wings spread, no wider than 4 millimeters. She put it in her coat pocket without examining it further. She did not look at Conrad. In the parking garage, alone in her car, she set both keys side by side on her knee, the one from Vivienne's deathbed, the one from Howell's envelope, and looked at them under the dome light. They were not the same key. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she remembered something Vivienne had said during one of the bad weeks in Akron, something Margaret had attributed to the medication. My mother never trusted banks. Not after what happened. She trusted walls, and for the first time, she wondered if Vivienne had known exactly what she was saying. She left Dayton at 7:40 with $214 in her checking account and a granola bar eaten at a gas station pump outside Youngstown, where she put $31 in regular and did not go inside. Route 11 south through Mahoning County. Flat farmland gone the color of dead straw, a sky the precise gray of old concrete, billboards for personal injury attorneys repeating at intervals like a warning. 1 hour and 40 minutes. She drove without the radio. The lane off the county road had no marker. She passed it, reversed, and turned onto gravel that had not been maintained in years. She smelled it before anything else. Old wood saturated with decades of weather, the flat mineral odor of standing water, and underneath both a faint metallic edge that reached her through the car's vents before she had stopped. Then she heard it. A shutter moving in a slow creak, too rhythmic for wind that had gone still. Then the cold came through the glass as she slowed, not November air, but the specific chill that radiates from a structure unheated for years. The gravel under her tires was soft, sinking on the left where drainage had failed. Then, finally, she looked. The house had been white once. It was gray-green now, the color wood becomes when it surrenders. One porch post listed 15 degrees. The front steps were gone entirely. A silver maple on the east side had dropped a major limb against the wall, and the limb remained where it landed. She sat in the car for 4 minutes. She thought about $214. She thought about Vivienne's grip on her hand. She got out, inside, plaster dust and old smoke and the stillness of unbreathed rooms. Warped floors, a kitchen stripped of everything. At the back, a narrow door opened onto basement stairs, and from below came cold water, rot, and underneath those, something dry, something sealed. She descended 4 steps with her flashlight and stopped. The draft was wrong. Air moved steadily toward the south wall, not from the stairs, not from any gap she could identify, toward the wall. In a basement with no windows, she raised the light. The south wall was plastered smooth and painted flat, deliberate finished work, in a house where nothing else had been touched in decades, and the paint was a different shade from the water stains around it. Someone had sealed that wall, and they had done it carefully. She returned with a flathead screwdriver from the glove compartment, a claw hammer from the trunk, and work gloves bought for $4.99 at a gas station 2 towns back. She had not known why she bought them. She knew now. She tapped the south wall left to right in horizontal rows. For 6 feet the sound was solid, flat, dead stone behind plaster. 4 feet from the east corner it changed, not hollow, enclosed. A resonance that traveled into her palm and stayed. She set the hammer's claw to the plaster seam and worked inward. Behind the plaster was newer drywall. Behind the drywall, original stone and mortar, and set flush into the stone, invisible until the last panel came away, was a steel door. 32 inches wide, 48 inches tall, hinges recessed. Lock a heavy brass mechanism centered in the face with a keyhole shaped for a key with a crane stamped into the bow. She put Howell's key in. It fit. The mechanism did not turn. She applied slow lateral pressure and held it, working against decades of compression and calcified rust. 11 minutes. When the click came, she felt it in her wrist, not her fingers, a deep mechanical concession, like something that had been bracing against her finally letting go. The smell arrived before the door opened fully. Cedar oil, lanolin, and beneath those something mineral and compressed, air that had not moved since before she was born. The room was 9 feet deep, 7 feet wide, shelved on 3 sides, the floor raised 2 inches and completely dry. Her flashlight moved across the shelves, wooden crates sealed with lead tacks, oilskin packages tied with waxed twine, a padlocked steel document box, and on the center shelf, at eye level, a cream envelope gone amber at the edges, her name written on its face in a hand she did not recognize. Not Kovar, her birth name. Margaret Elaine Voss. She opened the envelope first. The letter was dated March 14th, 1962, written in precise slanted script in ink, gone brown with age. Irina Voss Kovar had emigrated from Bratislava in 1923 and watched European banks fail before she left. When Roosevelt's Executive Order 6102 required surrender of gold in 1933, Irina had already converted her holdings into pre-1933 gold certificates exempt from the order, and into pre-war jewelry, documented and appraised. She had sealed everything here in 1938 when her husband's illness made his family's intentions clear. The letter said Irina had asked Vivienne to find the woman who gave without accounting for it. It said, "The son who counts what he is owed before he gives anything will never understand what you are holding." A Pittsburgh attorney's number was written at the bottom. It ended without sentiment, which made its final line more permanent than sentiment ever could. You are not owed this because you suffered. You are owed this because you stayed. Inside the steel document box, beneath the certificates and appraisals, was a 1931 property survey and an original deed listing Irina Kovar as sole owner of the Sycamore Mill Road parcel, with a handwritten addendum, noting the property had never entered the joint marital estate. It had always been Irina's. She had left it to Margaret directly, outside Vivienne's estate entirely. Margaret stood in the cedar-smelling dark, letter in one hand, deed in the other, completely still. Then headlights crossed the basement ceiling. Outside, gravel shifted under tires. The engine stopped. Someone had parked at the end of the drive, and they were not leaving. Conrad Kovar had not driven to Canfield alone. The man beside him was never introduced by first name. He was introduced by the quality of his overcoat, charcoal wool, perfectly fitted, and by the practiced stillness of someone who had spent decades being the most dangerous person in rooms that did not look dangerous. His name was Aldrich. He carried a leather portfolio and did not look around the house when he entered it, which meant he had already decided it was not worth looking at. Conrad, by contrast, was polite. He was polite in the specific way of people who are winning. Unhurried, almost generous, delivering bad news with the patient tone of someone explaining something simple to someone slow. He stood in the doorway at the top of the basement stairs and did not come down. He looked at the stairs, and then he looked at Margaret standing at the bottom of them, and he did not move. She noticed this. She filed it. He told her the facts without pleasure, which was its own kind of pleasure. That morning he had filed a motion challenging her bequest on grounds of undue influence. Vivienne's mental capacity, he said, had been compromised at the time the will was drafted. The motion included a petition for emergency injunction, barring the removal or transfer of any property or contents from the Sycamore Mill Road address, pending litigation. The injunction had been granted at 10:47 a.m. It was now 2:13 p.m. She was welcome to retain an attorney, he said. But the injunction was already in effect. If she removed anything from the property, she would be in contempt of court. He said it the way you tell a child the game is already finished. Not cruel, just final. Aldrich stepped forward and held out a copy of the filing. She took it. On the cover page, her name was spelled wrong. Margaret. One letter missing, as though even the legal system could not be bothered to look at her carefully. Somehow, this was the detail that settled everything into focus. The injunction hearing was set for 11 days out. If Conrad's motion succeeded, a court-appointed administrator would inventory and liquidate the property's contents as part of Vivienne's estate. 11 days to erase what she had found. Conrad's final words came from the doorway as he turned to leave. "Margaret, you're a good person, but good people don't win these things. You should let it go." Then he was gone. The house was silent. The vault door stood open behind her. Her left hand rested against her coat pocket, and inside it, pressed flat against her hip, was the 1931 deed. The document that established this property had never been part of Vivienne's estate at all. Conrad's injunction covered Vivienne's estate. It always had. It always would. She looked at the deed. She looked at the vault. Then she took out her phone and dialed the Pittsburgh number. Sylvia Brandt was 71 years old and had been waiting for this call since before Margaret knew her own name. Her grandfather had handled Irina Kovar's legal affairs beginning in 1929. Her father had maintained the file through the 50s and 60s. Sylvia had inherited it in 1987 and re-authenticated every document in it 3 times since, once per decade, as Irina's original instructions to the firm had specified. Those instructions were precise. If the Sycamore Mill Road property was ever properly inherited, the Brandt firm was to provide authenticated copies of the 1931 deed, the pre-1933 gold certificate registry, and a chain of title document establishing that the parcel had never entered the Kovar marital estate. The file was ready. It had always been ready. Margaret had not been unprotected. She had been protected since before she was born. The meeting took place 7 days later in a conference room on the 9th floor of Sylvia Brandt's Pittsburgh office. Aldrich arrived expecting a negotiation. Some token settlement, a quiet relinquishment, the posture of a woman who had run out of options. He set his portfolio on the table with the ease of someone who had already written the outcome. Sylvia Brandt sat down across from him and placed 3 documents on the table without introduction or preamble. The first was the 1931 deed. Aldrich's expression did not change. His hand stopped moving. The second was a certification from the Ohio Historical Property Registry, confirming the Sycamore Mill Road parcel had been recorded as separate property in perpetuity, filed under Irina's birth name, Voss, not her married name. Conrad's legal team had searched Kovar. They had found nothing because they had looked for the wrong woman. The third was a letter from Conrad's own attorney, the one who had drafted Vivienne's will, confirming that the Sycamore Mill Road property had been explicitly excluded from the estate inventory at Vivienne's instruction. It was not hers to leave, she had told him, so she had not left it. Conrad's legal challenge was not weakened by these documents. It was made irrelevant. The injunction he had obtained covered Vivienne's estate. The Sycamore Mill Road property had never been part of Vivienne's estate. The injunction had never applied to anything Margaret held. Aldrich closed his folder. He did not look at Conrad. He looked at the table, and the table told Conrad everything his attorney would not say aloud. Conrad read his own attorney's face and understood what had happened before a single word was spoken. Margaret looked at him once. She spoke quietly, without emphasis, in the tone of someone stating a fact that has always been true. "Your mother trusted me with what your grandmother built. I think we both know why she didn't trust you." He had called her a lost cause in that Columbus conference room while his wife checked her phone. He had looked at a cold brass key and seen nothing worth his attention. He had built an entire legal strategy on an estate that did not contain what he believed it contained, because it had never occurred to him to look under a name he did not recognize. Aldrich and Sylvia Brandt were both present. The meeting was memorialized in the formal legal record. The defeat was witnessed, documented, and permanent. Conrad's challenge was withdrawn 48 hours later. The vault's contents had not yet been appraised. That evening she drove back to Dayton, and for the first time in 14 months, she stopped for gas without counting what it would cost her. The vault's contents were appraised over 31 days by a certified firm in Columbus. The pre-1933 gold certificates were valued at $1.14 million. The 18 pieces of pre-war jewelry, among them a 1920s Cartier brooch, a set of diamond eardrops, and a sapphire parure of Austro-Hungarian origin, appraised at $834,000. The mineral rights on an adjacent parcel, leased to an energy company since 1987 without the family's knowledge, generated a back payment settlement of $412,000, total appraised value $2,386,000. Conrad's withdrawn legal challenge triggered a counter-complaint from Sylvia Brandt's firm alleging fraud on the court, that his original filing had deliberately misrepresented the scope of Vivienne's estate. He settled for $193,000 and received a formal reprimand from the Ohio Bar Association. The litigation had also drawn scrutiny to how he had managed Vivienne's investment accounts during her illness. A civil audit resulted in a judgment against him for $287,000 in misappropriated funds. He did not go to prison. He sold the Bexley house 14 months later at $61,000 below its appraised value. The listing noted the property was being sold as is. Margaret used $340 suicido to establish the Irina Voss Foundation, a non-profit providing legal aid and financial counseling to widows navigating contested estate proceedings in Ohio and Pennsylvania. She hired 3 people. She works there 4 days a week. On her desk is a photograph of Vivienne taken during one of their drives to Akron. Vivienne asleep in the passenger seat, face toward the window, looking peaceful in the way people only do when they trust completely where they are being taken. On a Tuesday morning in late spring, she stands outside the foundation's office on a sidewalk warm with early light. Maples overhead just fully leafed, the air carrying cut grass and something faintly sweet from the bakery 2 doors down. She takes her key from her coat pocket and opens the door. In November, she had stood in a cold parking lot with $31.47 counted out in her palm, going over the number as though repetition might change it. Now she holds a key to something she built with her own name on it, and the door opens and she goes inside. Some people hide their most valuable things from those who would waste them, and leave them for those who won't. Vivienne's mother knew this. Vivienne knew this, and now Margaret knew it too. Not as a lesson, but as a fact of the world she was finally allowed to live in.